Glad to have you back. Well, there seems to be no end in sight yet to the hardship the banking public is passing through over the lingering scarcity of the old and new Naira notes across the country. Many Nigerians have continued to queue at ATM locations while others paying exorbitant withdrawal charges to point of sales operators, regularly called POS operators, to get cash to run their daily activities amid failed online bank transactions, despite the extension by the Apex Bank of the deadline of the old Naira notes existence to February 10 after the initial January 31st. Economic analysts to express concerns that the Naira scarcity is adversely affecting commercial activities in the country urge the federal government to quickly address the situation to avoid an impending recession. Well, let's get an expert analysis into this prolonged scarcity of the notes. And he's an economist and tax manager with PricewaterhouseCoopers, Abiodun Kayode Ali. Thank you so much. It's good to see you.
Thank you for having me, Tolu. Good afternoon.
Yes. Well, let me start with what you really think is the implication of this if this persists. We see long queues at ATM galleries. We see people getting so aggressive at banks, they can't access their funds. That is the bad part of it. And legally, I hear that is also wrong. So as an economist, what does this mean economically for us? Because it seems like we're just driving the economy to the other side.
Yeah, Tolu, it's actually worrying, all right? And just like you rightly said, one of the things that is firstly going to affect people is that cash is actually a means to an end, right? And if they don't have that means in form of physical cash, they are unable to get that particular end. And if you stay on these queues like I have, you hear a lot of people complaining about not being able to access healthcare or even educational facilities for their wards or children. So these are some of the difficulties and hardship that people are facing. Apart from that, from an economic perspective, right, if you think about productivity, a lot of man hours is going to be wasted simply by staying on that queue, because you see a lot of people who need this cash to carry out their daily commute, right? For you to move from one location to your place of work, you actually do need cash because the transporters only demand for cash. You're not going to give a molo a driver, right? Or you're not going to give the Danfo buses your ATM card, or you're not going to do a transfer, even if you take a keke napep, right? So these are some of the things, these are some of the ways it's impacting people in terms of productivity, loss of man hours, and eventually it's going to impact on the GDP, because the GDP simply measures the economic activities that are taking place within a particular point in time. So if you think about this first quarter, it's going to be impacted. So also even the last quarter of 2022. So these are some of the things that we're going to see. And more importantly, a lot of people can't afford basic items, right? Because you need this cash to trade. Our retail sector, our trading sector is highly dependent on cash. People can't buy food items, right? And I'm sure you've heard about analysts talking about how some people are now requesting that if you are going to use the new notes, you might pay it at the actual price, which is the basic price. If you're going to use the old notes, you'll pay something higher. And if you're going to do a transfer, you pay something higher still. So it's definitely going to impact on GDP. It's going to impact on even the poverty, right? Because a lot of people, ironically, even though this current administration plans to lift people out of poverty, you see a situation whereby a lot of people are even thrown below the poverty line as a result of what is ongoing, right? And if people begin to get irate or continue to be irate because they are already irate, right? If they continue to be irate, you see situations whereby it will lead to damage, loss and destruction of properties. We don't want a repeat of what happened during the NSAS to take place again. So definitely in the long run, it's going to impact on GDP. That's what I see for Q1.
Interesting way to start. But Mr. Biodun, there seems to be a problem. Many analysts would argue that, well, it's not really a totally bad policy talking about redesigning of the Naira. But the way it's being done here in Nigeria, it seems something is not just being properly done. I can tell you for some weeks, I've not been able to access more than 20,000 Naira cash That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I understand your concern, and they are right when they say nothing wrong with the policy, because over time the CBN hasn't done anything wrong in introducing the policy, right? But I think one thing that we've seen is that there is that shortage of the new Naira note, right? So the CBN has actually said that it's trying to mop up about 2.7 trillion out of the system. But what we know is that the CBN has currently printed an estimate of about 400 billion, right? Which is actually not sufficient, which is leading to the scarcity. You can imagine a situation whereby you go for a party and probably the food that is being served doesn't go around. You can imagine how people would begin to react, right? It's a similar situation we found ourselves in. So what should the CBN have been doing? And if you remember, Tolu, a lot of times we've always said this, right? Anytime the government takes a policy, it's important that you look at what is the infrastructure on ground to be able to help with that policy that you've taken. The first, if you remember, the policy in 2019 regarding the closure of the border, right, with respect to rice being smuggled, right? There was no alternative to cater for the consumption, the demand for Nigerians. It's a similar thing we are seeing here, right? Even despite the fact that there are lots of alternative payment channels, such as the online banking, right? You've seen a situation whereby a lot of these deposit money banks have issues with their payment channels. There are some banks who they've not been able to carry out mobile money transfer. They've not been able to carry out online banking for a very long time. And that's the very reason why people who are banking with these institutions are now queuing, right, at the physical stations, right? But sadly, the Naira is still not available even at that point in time. So for me, I think one thing that is key is the logistics, right? Did we get the logistics right? But it's better it's better now than never, right? So I think it's very key that the CBN works along with deposit money banks to ensure that that channel, that distribution channel, that alternative payment channel is available. And for me, I think one thing that could be done at this point in time is to look for other alternatives, right? And probably work in conjunction with the telcos to ensure that there is actually network where there needs to be network. And for people in the rural areas, could there be other alternatives that could be provided to them? If you look at Kenya, which is a perfect example of how mobile money banking should be done or how digital payments should be done, they have infrastructure whereby with the code, right, with the USSD code, you can easily make payments, right, without taking any time. And these are some of the issues that we've actually been facing. If we can work on this, then at the same time now come up with these sort of policies such that they are running together, it would be a seamless process, right? Then one other thing that is quite important has to do with the timeline. Although you might say that the 90 days, the CBN hasn't gone past any rule or hasn't broken any rules by giving that 90-day deadline. But one thing you need to consider is that if you look at our economy, it's not like we had the infrastructure and it's not like people were already used to the alternative payment platforms, right? So there should have been more time for this particular policy initiative. And that's exactly what we see in other developed nations like the United States, the United Kingdom, giving them more time while they are phasing out the old currencies and introducing new notes. So for me, it's more about the logistics and the distribution, because at this point in time, the system is already heating up. That's what we've seen. So getting the logistics right is always important. If the CBN had to do a kind of test, right, an initial test, maybe in a certain location to see how people would accept this new policy, it would have helped, not the instant doling out of this policy, which has led us to this current state that we're in. So those are my thoughts about what people think about the timeliness of this policy.
Indeed, I think something like maybe a town hall that would have had all representatives present, market people, business people, POS operators, online transfer operators. All of these people were to be in one room, and understand where they can come in to address. I totally agree with you with regards to the infrastructure issue, talking about the online thing, which I don't see how we can improve because we're already in the pool. We shouldn't catch cold at the moment. But I would also ask you that as much as we are lamenting and complaining, the guys behind the POS machines are smiling to the bank. And that is what everyone is talking about. You see some pictures online, you see them with big, well, that's on a lighter note. But truth be told, it's like we are now taking advantage of ourselves. Same we do when there's fuel scarcity. Why are we like this?
Okay, so Tolu, that's simply human behavior, right?
Hmm.
That's simply human behavior. So if you listen to one of the words, or if you remember one of the words of Adam Smith, right? He said it's not out of the benevolence of the bread maker that he bakes bread, right, for people to consume. So what people mostly do is that they try to they act as opportunists and take advantage of the situation. That's exactly what we've seen playing out. And how can we address this? I think it's quite important that regulators are actually monitoring this space. One key thing for me is, despite the fact that the CBN has actually issued guidelines on how this exchange, right, this swap for the old currencies should be done, how much has been done with respect to monitoring? Tolu, would you imagine that it was, I think, like a week towards the January 31st deadline that the CBN actually introduced that rural dweller cash swap, right, for those in the rural areas? This is something that should have been done earlier. So for me, I think it's quite important that you know that in situations like this, Nigerians would always take advantage of it. That's the honest truth, right? Our institutions and our infrastructure are not there for monitoring. One thing that would have been key for me is if the CBN had actually given out like a number. Imagine if there was a phone number you could call, or probably an agency, so a way you could report to the CBN, right? Any sort of illegal or nefarious activities that are being carried out by these intermediaries, that's the POS operators at this point in time. I mean, everyone, a lot of people have phones, right? A lot of people have phones. You could simply take a video, right? And you could send that message, send the picture to the CBN, send the details. That way, the CBN will be able to monitor it using the public as their own eyes, right? So I think this sort of monitoring is needed, right? And be it as it may, the situation is exactly what we see right now. But in addition to this monitoring, I also think that some things could be done to actually alleviate the pains of people. And one of those things I would say would be probably organizations who are into services, probably allowing their workers to do remote working, which is what I'm currently doing right now. Because the truth be told, the dual or these two economic evils of having fuel scarcity along with this Naira shortage, right, is actually doing a lot of harm. And if you could easily consider people who would have to commute, right, they could probably work from home for the services. It might be difficult for the manufacturing, for those who are into manufacturing of goods, but for the services, that would help to a large extent. But Tolu, once again, to answer your question, it's simply people just taking advantage of the system not being monitored, or the institutions and infrastructure for monitoring not being there. That's just the way it is. So from my own point of view, I think regulators should need to come in here and not just look at the cities where they are mostly situated in, because it's easy to see the problems of the cities, but how much more those in the interland, those in rural areas who find it very difficult to access deposit money banks or any of their payment infrastructure. I think a lot of monitoring needs to be put in place. That's my take, to do.
Mm, mm. Finally, there's also been comments and recommendations like they need to reduce charges maybe on online transfers at the moment, since that is where everybody has to shift to at the moment. That is one. Some also say that this challenge is getting too much, and I think that the old notes still need to coexist with the new ones so that at least we can, for some time, so that we get it better. I don't know what you think around this. For me, clearly this morning when I was coming to the office, driving to the office, I still saw people holding the old notes in bulk. In bulk, business people. I saw it myself this morning. What happens to that if the CBN decides to stand on this February 10th thing, despite the court ruling and all of that? What do you think about making all of this easier and more attractive for us?
Yeah, I do quite agree with you, right? To encourage people, one of the objectives of this policy has to do with financial inclusion, all
Yes.
right? And to encourage people to still be financially included, it's quite important that you reduce these charges, right? At this point in time, typically, if the CBN wanted to stick to this timeline, what I would have recommended would be you attracting people to bring in their cash and use alternative payment channels. So like you rightly said, in order to attract people to do this, you need to reduce the charges, and you also need to work with that acceptability in terms of payment timelines. I make a transaction and it goes seamlessly and smoothly, right? So those are the things I do agree with you. They need to reduce the charges, and they also need to create that infrastructure, make things simple, attract people to come to the online platform. With respect to those who are holding those bulk old currencies, right? It's quite worrying at this point in time, because for you to be able to do away with that old currency, you need to take it to the CBN. Now the question is, how many people can locate the CBN in different in respective states, right? So I think with this problem, there is also an opportunity, right? There's an opportunity for people who could probably collect this money on your behalf for a particular fee, who will then carry this bulk of money to the CBN, right? So I think with this problem, there also lies opportunities, but it's very important, right? One thing is quite key. The CBN might need to look into this policy again, because the honest truth is that people are not meant for policies, but policies are meant for people. And economic policies are meant to impact people in terms of growth and development. They're meant to impact positively in terms of inflation, bringing it down, and in terms of unemployment and addressing poverty. But it seems like this policy is going to impact a lot of people negatively. So from my own point of view, I think the CBN needs to do a lot more than what it's currently doing. Those are my few thoughts, Tolu.
Well, interesting stuff there, Mr. Abiodun Kayode Ali, economist and tax manager of PricewaterhouseCoopers. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. We really do appreciate this. Do enjoy the rest of your day.
You too, Tolu. Thank you.